I want to turn to something Nina mentioned about a possible court fight, because the Supreme Court could be the pivotal institution in the wake of the election. And President Trump this week continues to warn of widespread voter fraud, even as the FBI Director Christopher Wray shut down such a suggestion in testimony this week. And he said there's no evidence of that. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows then attacked Wray on Friday and told him to, quote, drill down instead on the Justice Department's probe of discarded mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. This standoff over the integrity of the election, it's testing American democracy. And so is the president's comment this week that, quote, we're going to have to see what happens, when he was asked if he will commit to a peaceful transfer of power. A day later, the GOP-controlled Senate affirmed its commitment to a peaceful transfer with no objections to the resolution offered by Senator Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat. But Republican responses to the president, they were mostly muted.
There will be a peaceful transition of power, and that anyone who has sworn an oath to our Constitution, including the president, I'm confident is committed to the same principle.
There will be a smooth transition, and I believe President Trump will have a very good inaugural, and we will reunite this nation.
Nina, how serious is this moment for American democracy?
I think that's pretty serious. If we ended up with a very close election and a Bush versus Gore kind of situation, with a court that's far more conservative than the Bush versus Gore court was, and I don't know what that means for voting rights, but in general, the Republican nominees on the Supreme Court currently have not been particularly friendly to voting rights. They've turned aside virtually every challenge to voting rights infringement this year. And that includes Chief Justice Roberts. So this has potential to be really explosive. And as a citizen, one can only hope it doesn't come to that.
Carl, there was a headline in the New York Times, your paper, on Friday, quote, at Pentagon, fears grow that Trump will pull military into election unrest. When you're talking to Republicans, how do they see this issue privately and perhaps publicly?
Yeah, I think that was an excellent story, because the Pentagon, it shows you they are worried about this. I think this has become, just as Nita said, a very serious situation. I think people were taking it a little lighter, but the president has continued to insist on this, and I think Democrats are alarmed and are making plans. Mitch McConnell, the Republicans, came out and said, of course there's going to be a peaceful transition, and they passed that resolution. But that's window dressing. Mitch McConnell may be a lot of things. He's not a clairvoyant. He can't sit there and say there is going to be a peaceful transition. I think this is going to get more worrisome as it proceeds, and I think we've all been talking for months or even years now at this point, when would Senate Republicans really confront President Trump? I mean, that might be the moment where they have to do it, and we will see what happens.
Well, Carl, just to follow up, there was that moment famously in '74 where Senator Goldwater goes to Nixon, says it's time to go. If President Trump's defeated, do you see Senate Republicans playing a prominent role in trying to have a peaceful transfer of power or not?
I mean, we haven't seen that from the Republicans yet, that real showdown moment. I presume that in the event of a clear outcome that they would do that. But as you saw in their comments this week, they kind of both sides that, Hillary Clinton said Joe Biden shouldn't concede. That was out of context. So, they're not there yet, that is for sure. And, we've got a ways to go.
Sung Min, when you're reporting on the White House and talking to officials there inside and outside, do they see the president's comments as a president trying to protect his brand, or do they see him as a president really ready to use the levers of power to stay in office?
Well, they have had to explain away a lot of the president's comments for weeks now. I mean, talking about his repeated baseless claims about the safety of mail-in balloting. And this is another comment that they really had to kind of qualify. You saw Kayleigh McEnany the day after the White House press secretary, the day after the president's comments, saying the president will support a free and fair election. But that is not what he had really said, in his comments. And that's why you're seeing some of the concern bubble up. And, just following up on what Carl was saying earlier, it is not often that that Mitch McConnell comments proactively on the president's comments or his tweets. He makes it clear to us that he does not make it a habit of do so. So the fact that he put out a statement, as kind of soft as it may be, that there will be a peaceful transfer of power after Election Day, it shows you just kind of the level of alarm that Republican officials, Republican leaders were seeing at this point.
Nina, I mentioned 1974 and Goldwater and Nixon to Carl. You began your career covering the court in Washington right around President Nixon, reporting on the Nixon White House. Any lessons learned from that period or when you covered Bush v. Gore in 2000 to help us understand what we're going through here?
Well, those were really different times. People were institutionalists. Senator Goldwater, who was among the most conservative members of the Senate, today might be slightly to the left in the Republican Party in the Senate. And there were lots of people who had served for a very long time in the Senate and the House, and that is no longer true. There are some old bulls left, but not many of them. And it's the old bulls, in fact, who could be a block to abolishing the filibuster, who could be a block to any sort of ideas about changing the Supreme Court. That is sort of, but they're few and far between anymore.
And we also are looking ahead next week to the first presidential debate moderated by Chris Wallace of Fox News Tuesday night in Cleveland, Ohio. Carl, what do Democrats want to see from Vice President Biden? He's been prepping for days.
They want to see a competent debate. I've had more and more Democrats say to me in the past few days, boy, we're really hoping for a good debate. They see this as a critical moment. Biden's going to have to stand up to the president, call him out on some of these things in a forceful way. To Democrats, there is a lot riding on this debate right now.
What about inside the White House, Sung Min?
Well, they clearly see this as a critical moment as well. But you have seen for some time the president kind of lowering the expectations, not directly in reference to the debates, but just all the references that he and his team make towards the former vice president's, work ethic, his demeanor, the president's nicknames towards him, Sleepy Joe. So I think in that sense they may have unintentionally or not, lowered expectations for the vice president at this debate. So whether that was a smart strategy move or not, yet to be seen. But the president is clearly not someone who does debate prep in the traditional sense. So on the issues that we know are going to be discussed, so the pandemic, the Supreme Court, all these critical issues, we'll see how Trump kind of shows up, and it'll be just a fascinating contrast to watch.
Nina, in the final 30 seconds here, your friend Justice Ginsburg, what a week watching all of the remembrances of her. When you stand back and reflect, what comes to mind at this moment on Friday night?
Well, what really caught me unaware, I had not anticipated. I anticipated all the political firestorm. What I didn't anticipate was that when she died on Friday night, within an hour, there were hundreds of people who just went to the Supreme Court with candles, with flowers, and singing. Singing Amazing Grace. That I didn't expect.